Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about adherence. And this kind of ties in with my current event stuff from earlier today. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skill at my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. Because I kind of got this idea looking through the comments just a little bit ago, the last video I put up with the current events, with the whole Chris Jones and Vegan Gains thing, and people were saying, yeah, but Chris did talk about adherence, and like Dr. Eric Helms talks a lot about that adherence is actually better than getting what's optimal. And that's kind of the interesting take home. That's one of the reasons we see so many things that aren't actually optimal, whether it's a diet or a training style, that people sometimes get amazing results off of. But we look at it and go, well, we know that's not ideal. Yet people will swear up and down about how amazing it is and how great it worked for them. And a lot of times that comes down to consistency and adherence. And I'll give you guys two examples to ponder on. Let's take, for example, ketogenic diets. Right? Ketogenic diets. If you look at the scientific literature, if that was the sole basis, and I don't mean the ketotard science, I mean the objective literature looking at fat loss, body composition, everything else, no reasonable person would look at that because we know the insulin obesity model is wrong. No reasonable person looks at a ketogenic diet and thinks that is optimal for fat loss, do they? People say, what do you mean? Why would they say that? Well, calorie for calorie, it usually causes slightly less fat loss than more balanced diets. A lot of people aren't aware of that. Right? It is actually not a particularly great fat loss diet. Now, people say, but you burn more fat while you're on it. Yeah, because you're eating more fat. You burn what you eat first before you tap into your body fat stores for the most part. Now, granted, there's some overlap in circulating stuff that goes on, body fat stored or growing and shrinking every day. I understand that. But generally, the majority of the calories and energy that you're using at any one given time is based upon what you have eaten in the last few meals. So if you eat an enormous amount of fat, you're going to burn an enormous amount of fat because that's what you just gave your body for fuel. You're burning the fat you ate. If you eat a bunch of carbs, you're going to burn glucose. Right? This isn't a difficult concept. But from a fat loss perspective, the ketogenic diet actually has kind of a poor thermic effect. Sometimes performance isn't ideal on it, so energy out can be lower. It's not a particularly high protein diet. Remember, keto means moderate protein. It doesn't mean high protein. It's very high fat, very low carb. Protein's usually moderate. Carbs have a slightly better thermic effect as far as energy out than fat does. Protein has the highest. So it actually takes the lowest thermic effect macronutrient and the one that's least capable of fueling intense performance, which burns the most calories per minute. So ketogenic diets aren't particularly great for that. Furthermore, they don't preserve muscle very well because, again, they're not ultra high protein and they don't give you really an ideal training field for high intensity activity, the kind that builds muscle mass and helps maintain muscle mass. So if you look at it objectively, a ketogenic diet is really just about one of the worst diets you can follow for body composition, right? Objectively speaking. By a small margin, I'm not saying it's horrific, but compared to other stuff, it's mediocre. Not that great. It's on the lower end. Yet there are people who follow it and get great results. Why? Because it's easy to adhere to. Low food variety and still foods that taste relatively good. I mean, bacon, eggs, steak, that stuff tastes pretty good. Yeah, cheese tastes pretty good. They get foods that taste pretty decent. What are people's cravings? We crave salt, fat, and sweet. You're just removing the sweet, so you're getting fatty and salty. So reasonably palatable foods, we feel satisfied. The ketones can be slightly nauseating, but because it's a low variety diet, what happens? You don't have access to many different foods and flavors. We tend to, over time, get slightly bored with what we eat in that environment, and we start eating less and less. It's easy to maintain. For a lot of people, it's a really easy diet to maintain, so therefore they adhere to it, therefore they adhere to their caloric intake and deficit, and they lose body fat on it very effectively. Even though they're not losing as much fat as they could on a better diet, they're not preserving or building muscle as well as they could on a more optimal diet, are they? But they can adhere to it. And if you can adhere to it for a long, long period of time, and you have control and consistency, guess what? You'll get results. Not that great of a diet. That's why meal plans work. A lot of times meal plans are not ideal food intake for any given, because your food intake needs are dynamic for someone who's training and being athletic. Your food intake is very dynamic. Meal plans are kind of silly, but yet a lot of people get good results. Why? Because it's consistent. It's consistent. It allows consistency and adherence. And it takes you out of the decision-making process with food, which is something that for many people they have an emotional connection with, right? See how that could help with adherence? Well, same thing with training. I think we could all argue that for the most part, full body style training for most people is probably going to be closer to optimal. Particularly if you were to take several different training styles, I think for most people, a fairly high frequency full body arguably is going to give you the most optimal situation as far as overload, volume, things like that, and muscle protein synthesis, elevated uptime, all these things. It has the most potential for it from a programming perspective. However, some people find it boring. Some people find other training styles to be slightly more enjoyable. Even if they don't have the same capacity for producing size and strength and all these things that we're chasing, what happens if they're easier to follow? What if you have someone who has exercise ADHD? That's why I had recommended a certain type of body part, not body part, but movement pattern split. Like I said, 4 days a week, come in and have one day where you focus on the squat, another day you focus on the deadlift, another day on the bench press, another day on the strict standing press, just called the press, right? And then relevant accessories for those. So your deadlift day, you could do some hamstring work. Your squat day, you could, do some front squats or something else, some extra core work, all right? You could do pull-ups on the deadlift day, other back work. You could do that even on the standing press day. Maybe on your bench press day, some extra tricep stuff is needed, or some incline bench or whatever. But you come in and you do a lot of sets, up to 10 sets of that one exercise, and it's more or less ends up just being an upper lower 4 day a week, doesn't it? And in some ways, depending on what accessory movements you throw in as a back off, it's what can turn into full body. But it allows people who have exercise ADHD to hyper focus on one exercise for an hour, because you're going to come in and do 9 or 10 sets of squats or 9 or 10 sets of bench press. You can hyper focus, and then the next time they go to the gym, it's a different lift. The next time they go to the gym, they hyper focus on a different lift. For some people, guess what? That's a pattern they can follow. Other people need the randomness. They like the whole body part split thing. They can adhere to it more, even though it's technically going to be inferior. So here's the point with this. If you are doing something that isn't quite optimal, but you can adhere to it consistently in the long term, you're probably going to get better results than something that is optimal that you can't stick to. And that's the conundrum we run into. And that's well and good, as long as we understand it from that concept. When people say, this is what worked for me, people need to understand it doesn't mean that their training split actually produced the best physical results for them. It may not have. It doesn't mean that their diet choice and style had the potential to produce the best results for them. It's that they found that they personally could be consistent with it in their own mental state, in their own taste. So therefore they got great results. So that's what really it worked for me really means. It doesn't mean that it's actually better. It doesn't mean it's even physically better or ideal for that person. It just means they could stick it out. So you need to understand it from that perspective. And the only time this becomes a problem is, I think someone else just pointed out in the comments, and I agreed with this. I don't remember who said it, but I saw it in there. The problem is that when people take silly, trendy bullshit and decide that that's what they can be consistent with. See, I could have good adherence if I come in and play leapfrog and grab ass in the gym, right? I could have adherence if I follow whatever bizarre diet. But it's just crappy stuff that they're picking. It's not because they actually personally really could adhere to it. It's because it's easy or lazy. It could be a training style that's just so ridiculously easy and lazy. Oh, you're going to come in and do 15 sets of cable curls. That's not training. You're going to come in and just goof off in the gym. Well, sure, you can be consistent with goofing off and playing around, but that's not training, and you are going to get subpar results in that case. So what we mean here with the consistency is that you need to find something that, not because it's been made popular or trendy, that you're going to think that that's going to make it consistent. It's because you experimented around and found that you personally, with your mindset, can be more consistent with a given training style. Training, that's the word, not working out, not exercising, but an actual training style, which we understand the difference here on this channel. We discuss that a lot. Or a viable dietary approach that you know that you could be consistent with, because maybe in some way it removes your emotional attachments to food, or it just lets you work around it better. It could actually be to where you just do a really high protein and some version of intermittent fasting, and then you kind of eat whatever you want in the evening because you know that you won't overeat if you do that. I mean, that's another example of just consistency, right? It's an example of consistency, and that's all we're talking about here. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.